Hey, I'm Taylor Dorsett, and this is the Professional Technical Interviewee. Technical interviews are hard, and every company does them differently. On this show, I interview engineering leaders to see what they look for in technical candidates, and then they perform a real technical interview with me. I hope you enjoy.
Thanks so much for being here. How are you?
Doing good. It's a beautiful day in Denver, Colorado today. So
I love it.
A little brisk. It's winter, right?
Yeah, there you go. Well, what is it? 300 plus days of sunshine, right? You can't be too upset with Denver.
It's sunny today. So, But no snow on the ground, and the holidays are here. So I'm going, why?
Yeah. Cool. Well, to introduce you, Chris, you are a managing partner at LionKube. LionKube focuses, it's a professional services company focused primarily on FinOps, DevOps, cloud work, and Kubernetes specifically. Anything else I missed or anything else you want to plug?
I'm a published author. Recently started my own podcast like you, the FinOps Show.
Cool.
So we're bringing on guests about FinOps. My book, Core Kubernetes, is available through Manning Publishing, all the usual bookstores.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'll put you on the spot here because I didn't give you this one ahead of time, but a lot of folks, I think people are coming around. Most people generally know what DevOps is now. Most people have an idea what cloud is, even Kubernetes. But FinOps might be a new one for folks.
Yeah.
Could you just give us a little, maybe the couple minute version of what is FinOps and why is it important to any given company?
So I'll give you the background and instead of why. AWS approximately is $100 billion company per year inside of Amazon. So they don't release the numbers. So that's estimates by analysts. If you talk to architects, cloud architects, software developers, et cetera, they would estimate that 20 to 30% of that spend, $100 billion, is just plain waste. We're not talking about optimizing for cloud. We're not talking about rewriting code. We're talking about just spending too much money. So FinOps is a practice that brings together data, engineering practices, culture change in order for you to address cost overruns. And it allows you to look at implementing a culture of optimization within the cloud. Let's start shutting off dev at night. Let's turn off the VMs we don't need. That database over there that's costing us 10 grand a month that there were no network calls to last month. Why is that still on? So there's a FinOps organization that's laid out a lot of different standards. There's a couple of good books around it. It's a fairly new type of practice and idea. All the cloud companies are spinning up internal FinOps organizations, especially with what's going on with the economy today.
Yeah, that's really cool. I heard of some of that, but more so in the sense of it's one person at a company saying, hey, we should think about this, right? Instead of
it often is a FinOps guru, right? But it's more than that because you're a developer yourself, right? And you're the person that can, in my opinion, make the most impact. If you're given enough time in a sprint to say, okay, every other month or every fourth week, we're going to spend 2 or 3 days on just optimizing. Where can we reduce this? Is this too much? Let's look at some new reporting software to look at requests going in on certain, maybe we have XYZ here, XYZ there. There's a lot of great tools out there, but and we're partners with the folks that do some Kubernetes stuff, KubeCost. I'll throw that out there. But you get great dashboards. You got a person internally that's saying, hey, let's do this. But if the culture doesn't support it, it doesn't go anywhere. It's not just a single FinOps person. That person helps bring in the culture, bring in the changes, bring in the dashboards, drive that type of methodology. And, larger companies, it's a small group or a larger group of people to look at it. But it's like, do you know what your company's cloud bill is?
No.
Not to put you on the spot.
No.
Well, if you talk to any FinOps individual, you should know. You should know how much money per month is being spent. You should be told if you release a new product and expenditures go up 30%. Your CFO should be able to look at, okay, we released this new product, sales are at this, predicted sales in 6 months are going to be here. So yeah, the IT expenditure that we have makes sense. CFOs, CEOs, and CTOs should be able to look at the numbers. It should, and this is utopia, right? But for instance, there's a very large client that KubeCost has where they have everything going back to business intelligence. So they have multiple different software products, really large client. They can tell you for this product how much IT costs are and how much sales were. Last time I checked, that's how you do business. You actually understand the costs. And it gets more tricky when you have multiple products, you have multiple microservices, you've got network connections in the cloud. It gets interesting really fast, and it's non-trivial. But and we're not talking like major corporations. FinOps groups are saving $40 to $50 to $60 million a year. Within the first year or two that they're there. I would say if you have a Kubernetes cluster and you haven't actually looked at it and measured it, you've got cost overruns of 20 to 30 to even 50%. You're over provisioned. Wow. Engineers don't want to wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning, right? So we, in a weird way, are incentivized to over provision.
Sure. Yeah, it's rare you're gonna get an email saying, "Hey, we've got too much availability on this service," right? But if something goes down, you're gonna hear about it, right? So it's interesting.
Exactly.
It's really interesting.
Exactly. And you're never going to get an email that you have too much availability unless you've got software in place that spits you a Slack message saying, "Hey, you're at 40% optimization on this XYZ service. Go take a look at it."
Yeah. It's really interesting. So before I was an engineer, I was a recruiter for many years and ran a recruiting office. And so the weird part about this transition for me was I'm so used to seeing how does my revenue, my team's revenue directly translate to the business, right? Versus being an engineer where that line is, I had a dollar amount, right, of what our costs were and what our revenue was. And now it's a little bit harder to tell, okay, exactly what value do I bring, right? That's really interesting for someone that is that wants to have an eye on that. Moving into FinOps might be a way to be like, okay, I can show you exactly how we're able to save you money, right? And a much clearer picture of how a company impacts or how a team impacts the bottom line.
And it doesn't make any sense to me. Engineers aren't accountants. They aren't necessarily business people. But what happens if you tell an engineer that this service is costing $50,000 a month?
Hopefully they say, okay, is it worth that, right?
But wouldn't you think that they would go, okay, if we do this, it might cost less?
Yeah, sure.
We're problem solvers. And frankly, optimization is a really interesting problem to solve. So we're not talking about something that engineers don't enjoy. We're talking that they don't have the data, they don't have the time, they don't have the direction, we don't have the culture in order to do it. And and let's just throw this out there. Everybody does it. Sure. Unless you are a company with a long history of FinOps, which is 4 or 5 years in this industry, you have waste. And even those companies have waste. But we walk into a client, we're like, why is this service on? It's not even configured. Well, somebody did this button pushed. You can do this with bare metal as well. You can get more creative in terms of cost savings, retiring hardware if you have too much, bringing in new specialized hardware. So it's all, you can measure it. But your point, in other business divisions, budget is like there, seen. Okay, I have this much marketing budget. And admittedly, IT has that as well at the upper levels. But they don't typically have this microservice is costing us too much. Somebody needs to take a look at these SQL queries somebody needs to take a look at this database that's attached to this microservice because it's got 3-year-old data in it. Do we really need that data in it?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, thank you for that overview, because that's, I think, eye-opening for myself and probably a lot of people who haven't dove into that space before. Aside from FinOps, can you share a little bit about LionKube and your team and your role over there?
Yeah, like I said, I'm one of the founders, one of the managing partners. We help clients primarily out with day 0, day 1, day 2 operations with Kubernetes. Either we're helping out folks implementing operators, or they just need more staffing, or they've got architectural questions with Kubernetes. We've got some folks we meet with, on just every other week. One of our engineers gets on the phone and talks about architecture. So we help our clients in different ways. We've been in consulting since 1999. LionKube's just a rebranding focused towards Kubernetes. So yeah.
Cool. And can you share a little bit about your pathway into technology? Did you go the traditional computer science route, or what does it look like?
Sort of.
Yeah.
So started off in college working on electrical computer engineering. So it's a double E major. Dropped out of that when it was the .com time period. So folded into a startup. Really cut my teeth around that. Then I moved in consulting. So I've been in consulting for, since I would say 1998-ish.
Oh, wow.
And, worked with Perl, worked with multiple different languages. I actually started in IT building computers, like literally one of the first jobs I had was we ordered parts for 30 PCs, put them all together, got the PC under the desk of each of the individuals, saved the company a bunch of money, as well as got really, really high-end PCs for them. They were working on digital signal processing with sound cards back in the day. So that's where I started in IT, got into software for a long time, management, sales of a company, enterprise, leading this organization. And also we flipped into DevOps once it became kind of the darling of the industry. From there, segued into Kubernetes, of course. Been working on the cloud, off the cloud. So I have interviewed many folks, both non-technical and technical, over the years, and have probably some pretty strong opinions about current hiring practices and how effective they are.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about what, I guess, drew you to consulting and kind of keeps you in that world? Because I know there's a lot of engineers who, I don't know if it's the traditional route, but a lot of folks go to some type of product company or some type of services company, and they kind of build out some product, and maybe they go, oh, consulting might be interesting, but you always hear, oh, it's long hours, or the clients are, who knows if the clients are going to be good or not. So I find that sometimes people will be in one or the other, and then they never kind of cross over, right? Can you just share a little bit about what drew you to that world? Because it seems like there's people who love it and stick with it a long time, right?
It's mostly because of the diversity. We are not working on the same product for 6 months or a year. Even if our contract runs that long, we have a very varied background and lifestyle. We're called upon to not just be software engineers or DevOps engineers. We become a trusted expert. People come to us, expect us to have answers, and you get a more experience, I'd say, being a consultant. You're able to look at companies. You're able to figure out what type of company you might want to look for after you're being a consultant very quickly, because you get, I would say within, when I was billable, probably 3 or 4 different companies I worked with within a period of a year. There's not many folks that can say that. As well as, like I said, I counted last time the number of specialties we've had, and that's 8. So, and even now with Kubernetes, it's more and more in the mainstream. Once stuff gets in the mainstream, you don't necessarily need consultants to do it. Sure. Or, we don't work with consultants. Like, there's a lot of consultant companies which are doing staff augmentation at a level where they're junior and medium level engineers. We don't specialize in that. We have more medium high, senior engineers that will come in and help you. So it's very interesting. Now, not only am I involved in engineering, but I'm also an entrepreneur. So you figure out finance, you figure out sales, figure out how important sales is, because if a business isn't selling their product, which in our circumstances are services, you just don't make it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so it sounds like there's a large variety of different types of things you can get into and work on, but also you can become a subject matter expert in maybe an emerging field, because that's a lot, especially in a consulting company like LionKube is you're not just a body at a place, right? You're actually trying to be an expert and help someone implement something that they haven't done before, and then you get to learn the actual business, right? I do think that's something that, again, either people love or they hate it, right? Like, oh, let me see a P&L, right? Like, let me actually understand sales. Let me see how do we run this business ourselves rather than just being a cog in the wheel. So that's interesting.
Yep, absolutely. It's not for everyone. There's definitely more risk, especially as a entrepreneur. You have to be less risk adverse in order to do this job 9 to 5, but it's very rewarding. I have a story, and really what drives me is being able to put food on people's tables. I like being able to pay my staff a lot of money. They are, they're good financially, and I enjoy the work. I've definitely recently pivoted, and I would say it's not really a pivot recently, but doing more content creation, working in terms of education. I've got Manning's taking a look at my second book right now. We'll see if they like my idea or not. I would say writing a book was one of the hardest things I did, but very rewarding.
Sure. And
it's definitely your best business card. It's the most expensive business card you can get, but it's definitely your best business card. People in the elevator today were like, "What? You're an author?" I'm like, "Yeah, it just means you're stubborn. It just means you don't stop after you've got an idea." And as an engineer, I figured out I couldn't write. Also, public speaking as well. I'm one of the crazy folks that isn't scared of public speaking.
Sure.
I know, right? One of the odd engineers, and as well as doing different content, whether it's blog posts, writing, social media, what have you. It's definitely some of the things I enjoy, and that's kind of where I'm moving more towards. And we'll see over the next few years, what my career leads to. But I've definitely, I was on the phone today with somebody, and he was like, "Yeah, it's nice with the hard work that I've put in. It's nice that people feel that I know what I'm talking about." So.
Yeah, it's going to be gratifying after many years of being in the industry, and
yeah, I've been in just a couple. I've been coding since I was 12.
There you go.
I'm now 48.
Damn,
it's a couple of years.
Can you share? So you said you've been doing interviews recently. Do you do staff augmentation for other companies? So if you're interviewing, are you interviewing to hire people for LionKube, which are then going to be on clients or be working for
they'll
clients?
be on client site. We don't do like direct hire staff augmentation, but I've hired different staff, whether it's salespeople, whether it's technical people, for all different types of roles. We've got folks that, of course, work for us directly. I've interviewed folks that work for partners that are going to go work on a client site of ours. So yeah, I've been interviewing software engineers and technical folks and IT engineers and project managers for a long time.
Yeah.
Many years.
What part of the interview process do you usually handle? Or I'm sure you've probably done a little bit of everything, but nowadays, what do you typically focus on?
Technical interview side. I'm one of the subject matter experts, as well as just it's kind of a litmus test in terms of if they're the type of personality you want to put in front of a client. As you mentioned, consulting, we are the subject matter experts. You can't necessarily be a person that wants to sit in front of your computer for 8 hours a day and have very little human interaction.
Sure.
You're the type of people, you're most likely the type of person that's going to be a leader within the organization without any political influence, which is actually very interesting position to be in. Typically you have like capability, like if you're managing somebody, you can, encourage them with either a carrot or a stick. As a consultant, you can't. So it takes the right type of personality. And like I said, you really have to know your stuff. You can't come in to a client and say, oh, I don't know. You can say that, but you have to say, hey, you know what, that's a really good question. I haven't come across that. I bet a couple of our other engineers have. Let me go research that and get back to you tomorrow.
Yeah. If it's I don't know, it's I'll figure it out, right? Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is, I guess, what you mentioned personality, because that's obviously very important, and there's a technical aspect. Is there anything else you're really evaluating for in those conversations, in those interviews?
Your work ethic and values. You said you have to go figure it out. Are you the type of person that can be unsupervised? In consulting, you're probably some of the least unsupervised staff that exist. You're there, you take a set of tasks to do, you have a timeline to knock them out if you're delivering work, or you're embedded with the team and you just, you're working that way. Technically, consultants aren't able to be managed. If you are a 1099 consultant within IRS tax law, you actually can't be managed by a manager of your client's company, right? If somebody works as an employee to me or our organization, of course, they'll have managers that can manage them. But again, like some of our consultants, we won't talk to for 4 months. We'll have the, hey, how you doing on Slack? But, I've had consultants that worked for me I've never met personally.
Yeah. Interesting. That's really interesting. Are you, I guess, is the interview process the same for every role, or are you shifting it depending on the skill set and the individual you're looking for? Yeah,
absolutely. And mostly it's because we do non-technical hiring as well, in terms of, if we have a PM or we're hiring somebody for our accounting department, of course, it's going to be a bit different. We try to go through the same things. We've got a couple folks that do the primary interviews. I do a technical screening if I've got a skill set that is a little unique. Like say we hire a Bazel engineer, for instance. I'm one of the few people in our companies that understands Bazel really well. But, pretty much I have the same set of questions, same set of chats. I read the resume beforehand, do just a chit chat about their experience, and then go into a couple technical questions. You may be surprised, but technical interviews usually take 10 to 15 minutes for me.
Oh, interesting. Could you walk us through what that looks like? Because I don't think we've mentioned it yet, but we're not planning on doing a technical half of this podcast, like we typically would, because I think you're interested in interviewing folks in a different way rather than live high pressure coding environment, right?
Right. So, like I said, typically we walk through the resume, see how their experience aligns with the client, and then I ask them some specific questions. In the DevOps field, one of the questions I can ask is, how does Google.com work? When you hit enter on your keyboard, how does that work? Talk to me through the steps, talk to me through the systems that it works for. You're able to gauge the type of DevOps engineer they are. For instance, if they forget about the network, they forget about the DNS resolution. They don't talk about how your browser, your operating system has a cache of the DNS. They're like, well, it goes and hits the HTTP server. No. There's a couple hops in between that. We first got to get out of your Wi-Fi. You can tell the person when you ask that question is like, well, first there's an interrupt in your computer. I'm like, all right, now I've got a person that has been working with hardware in the past, is going to talk me through the network. You find the person that's really heavy network doesn't understand the application side, talking about caching, talking about database replication, talking about how we do a database that spans geos when you're talking about a huge system like Google. So there's all these things that are into such an easy question, right? Like, how does google.com work?
Yeah.
You'd think that's not that difficult a question. The other types of questions that I like to ask is, what's wrong with something?
Mm.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you do JavaScript, right?
Yeah, primarily JavaScript.
Yeah. So what's wrong with JavaScript?
Plenty. I find that sometimes syntax and I don't know, syntax a lot of times feels pretty silly in JavaScript and doesn't seem to be super coherent all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also, I guess this is less JavaScript and more front end in general, but there's so many different things you need to support that often it feels like you're playing whack-a-mole sometimes. If you got, I'm building for Chrome most of the time, and then I find out, oh, we've got users who use Firefox, we got users who use all these different types of things, and this may or may not be supported in any of those different web browsers, right? It's like, obviously those are the two things that feel the on a regular basis that I'm like frustrated with. Those are the big ones.
Right. You work with React or Node?
React. I've used both. I've done full stack JavaScript, but now I'm using more React specifically.
Okay. So as you get more senior and senior, you'll be able to say, this is wrong with the language. Right. This is eaten my shorts way too many times.
Sure.
This is, I've been up to 2 a.m. trying to find this type of bug over and over again. Dependency management is one of the things that is really just nasty with Java. Like, how do you know you have this library binding? Right. And you've had it where you get a 1.8.2 library stuck in your web page somehow, and it overrides the 1.9.3 library that you should have been running.
Sure. Yeah.
And there's no compile errors. Right.
Yeah.
So languages like Python, languages like Terraform, for instance, you used to not be able to write a Terraform unit test. Recently, you can now. Thank goodness. You used to be able to with like Kitchen and doing some really intricate unit tests. I'm just like, remind me, what's the JUnit unit test or JavaScript unit test library called? It's not JUnit.
Jest is the big one.
Jest. Yeah, Jest, right. And then there's what's the Selenium? You're able to fire that up with a headless, web page and all that. You're able to test it. You're able to test that this CSS is correct.
Yeah.
Like this CSS that's been chewing on you for 2 days, and if it's a little fragile, so you want to make sure it tests correctly, it works. That button is rendering, and it is on that page. With package management, it's messy. There's tools, actually, I mentioned Bazel. Bazel does a really good job of dependency management. And the thing is that dependency management between your system and test and your system and production, that's really interesting. Containers help with that, of course, but really you need a good dependency management system. So it's, Java is the same way. Dependency management and class loading is just a nightmare. At least with C++, you get stuff that links.
Sure.
And it breaks pretty hard usually, knock on wood. But yeah, there's just, and the syntax drives me nuts. You're right. It's like it's like Perl. I don't know if you've ever seen Perl, but I used to have a t-shirt that had a printout of Perl. That was a block of text on the front of a t-shirt. And it basically printed out the version of Perl.
Yeah, that's what I've seen of Perl. Having not worked at it, is basically a 75 character one-liner script to do something pretty basic, right? And God forbid you mess up one bit, because you'll never get it working again, right?
And stuff like TypeScript, React, all of those have helped with the standardization of how JavaScript works. But even still, you can do something 5 ways sideways, and you don't get a compile error, and you get this weird result. All of a sudden, you're getting a 3 when you expected a 5. And you're kind of like, what?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I guess those are, you're listing other bits of my gripes. When we don't use TypeScript now, and previous job I used TypeScript, I was like, oh, why isn't this always a part of JavaScript, right? Like it took 15 minutes for me to be like, okay, I got to do this extra stuff. And then I went, oh, that's half of the issues I used to run into are gone now, right? Which is, it's really interesting.
And we have these types of conversations. Let's loop back to why.
Yeah.
I found somebody can talk about, I did this. Somebody can talk about, this is a good tool. Somebody can talk about, this is how to do it. They've actually show experience if they say, this is bad. This is what's wrong with, you can't unit test Terraform. Fortunately, no, you can't. But, that's the kickers, right? Is a certain level of experience is shown on this stuff. With Kubernetes, I know what questions to ask. I know, hey, explain how Kubernetes networking works. A lot of engineers know what a stateful set know what a deployment is, know what a pod. Sorry, I'm going into API structures for Kubernetes if folks don't know that. But you've got to ask about the internals. You've got to ask about, why do you not run a process as PID1, right? Talk to me about how Linux namespaces interact in a pod. Specifically, if you're looking for a very senior engineer. If you're looking for, a medium level, junior engineer, you ask them, hey, what's a stateful set used for? Talk about the different API objects so they have the familiarity with that. The one thing that I found is it's very different from a person that's good at academics, that have certifications. Nothing wrong with certifications. I think it's a good thing. But if you look at a person that has certifications, they're more, I would say, of a person that understands and comprehends it, rather than does it and can fix it. It's kind of like they're a bit different. So I often see people that have like 30 certifications. And I'm like, I bet you're a really good person, just not in consulting, because that's not, you never know really what you're in head with consulting. Yeah. And I tell you, having 30 certifications, hey, good on you. I don't have that in me to do that much book work.
Sure. So. That's really interesting. And I think some people might say like, oh, these are tough questions. But if you're looking for senior level individuals and the exact domain you like, basically what your client needs, right? Like you have a domain that someone needs to be able to answer to. I actually really like that Google question. Like I've heard that in the past for like general software engineering roles, and I think it's a fine question. But if you're specifically looking for someone who's going to have some type of cloud or DevOps like face-to-face client work, you hit the nail on the head. You're going to see exactly what do they know and what don't they know about this process, right? And when we're talking about a general software engineer, you might not touch every piece of that. But if you're a DevOps engineer, you should have more of an in-depth knowledge of what's actually happening, right? When you click or when you hit send on Google, right?
And the funny thing to relate to that is software engineers typically don't mess around with DNS. You talk to anybody that's done DevOps for a long time, IT for a long time, DNS, it's always DNS's fault because it's often DNS's fault. But I've had in DevOps engineers that I've interviewed that haven't talked about the fact when you go to google.com, there's a DNS lookup. And within google.com, it's actually a DNS lookup that's geographically tuned. Like if you ping google.com, it might not be the same IP address as when I ping it. Yeah. Right. And it goes to a different place. So it's important that I understand that. Now, an interesting thing with your point, I'll have a pretty good idea of what our client needs, but often our engineers aren't that, like at times, especially if they've been there a long time, they start moving on to other stuff that's maybe out of their wheelhouse, or it's not what the client initially knew that they needed. And there's a saying that clients actually don't know what they need.
Sure.
And there's some truth to that and some non-truth to that. Depends on the type of relationship that we have with client. But often I don't know what they're going to be doing day in and day out. I don't understand exactly the internals of the project. what I understand is that we're hiring somebody that's going to be senior for Kubernetes. So I understand, like I asked, what's wrong with Kubernetes, right? And any engineer that's been waking up at 2:00 in the morning or has been doing consulting for, 3 or 4 years in Kubernetes can tell you, XYZ, hey, if you accidentally use kubectl 1.17 against a 1.22 server, you're going to have fun results. It's these little weirdness things that, and I don't expect them to know all the weirdness that I know. Just be able to give and articulate an answer to me. Sure. And it's a very unusual question in my mind. I don't think I've run into too many folks that specifically make sure that they ask negative questions.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Well, it's an interesting way to interview because I think a lot of people are almost hesitant to talk about anything bad in an interview, right? Unless I think everyone's got that one stored answer for, tell me about a time, you've had a bad experience in the workplace or something like that, right? But a lot of times you're thinking, oh, I got to put everything in a positive light so I don't seem negative, right? So getting that type of question might be like, oh, interesting. Let me actually think about this and give you a real answer, right? Instead of some canned response for they've had 10 interviews, right? Could you share just the actual interview process? Sound like there's a conversation with you. That's the technical portion. Is there some type of recruiter call or something before that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a recruiter, collects the resumes. Typically, there's one of our senior architects that screens them before me. I have a couple people, they'll give a write-up to the recruiter. Then from there, we submit them to the client almost in parallel as when I screen them. Often I screen them beforehand, but like I said, if they're hitting me, it's probably because they're really senior and or it's a technical specialty that I have. Often I'm not even part of this, the hiring process. It just goes through our recruiter. We've got pretty good job rec that we write up, and then it goes to one of our senior architects that might manage them, they might be on their team. So, and often at times, it depends on the client. Sometimes they want to talk to the staff that we bring onto a contract. And often we're just telling them, hey, this is the person. They're perfect. We're bringing them on.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. That's great. Yeah. I think the consulting world's always interesting, especially if it's, do I have to interview with both sides, right? Or not? I guess it just depends sometimes, right? It's funny.
What's really interesting, I'm sorry to interrupt, is often I can't tell them what they're going to be doing.
Sure.
They're often like, well, what am I doing? Well, here's the statement of work, but yes. Or if it's staff augmentation, I don't necessarily know the intricacies of the project that they're on. All I know is they want this type of job rec this type of contractor to go work for them. And then they'll be able to explain what the intricacies or what the project actually entails more. So that's often an interesting question, I guess. So what am I going to be working on? Well, get to talk to the client about that one. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the first guests on the podcast ever, Jay Wingrove, had a story of when he was going to work for, I think it was apartments.com or something as a consultant. And he said the interview with the actual company went terrible, right? It's like, no one liked me. It didn't seem like it was going well at all. I couldn't solve the problem really. Like I got something out. He's like, but at the end, they told me I was hired. So, well, I guess they liked me enough. So it's kind of interesting.
I think that was nerves too. I think he was misreading the hostility, because oftentimes people put up a hostility layer in order to see how you react. They will interrupt you often at times to see if you shut down and don't get in okay, I'm still going to keep on talking. I'm going to respect you enough that I'm going to stop talking for a moment.
Yeah. Well, flipping the table a bit, if you, in the past, when you've been in technical interviews yourself, how do you feel you did? Do you feel like, you smashed them all, you hate them, somewhere in between?
Well, I'm in sales, and I have the gift of gab, and I understand how to bring needs out of people. I understand to talk to people about, their life outside of work. Ask them, if they have family, ask them, we're emotional human beings, right? So they're not going to make a decision on if they're going to hire you because you're good technically, they're going to make a decision that they're going to hire you because they like you.
Sure.
I hate to say it, but interview process is a sales process.
Yeah.
If you're able to articulate very easily what you've done in the past, if you're able to sometimes say, no, what about this? I think you might have forgot about this. This is actually one of the things that we're going to need to focus on. If you're able to bring out more than what the interviewers are asking, it's usually a good thing. So yeah, my interview process is usually, it's I'm not all that in a bag of chips. I've definitely been turned down in the past, but not often. So, and as well as I'm going in through, I'm not applying on the website.
Right.
I build the connection through LinkedIn. I'll either shoot the LinkedIn recruiter a message, nowadays, or I will go in through a friend that knows a friend as a referral. Getting into the best jobs that you find aren't on the website or in the newspaper, and the best jobs you find are through a friend. Networking is half to 3/4 of the point of getting through it. Good LinkedIn profile, good activity on GitHub, good activity on blog or something, especially if you're really senior. All those add up. A book, if you really want to be senior, really want to be a subject matter expert in a field, write a book. It took 3 years for me to do mine with Jay. Really, the book exists because of Jay. Jay's far more technical, far more talented of an engineer than I am. I'm just a good mouthpiece at times.
Sure.
I know how to fix problems. I know what looks pretty. I know how to position a book that people will buy. But thank goodness I had him, because he's at a whole another PhD level of amazingness than I am with Kubernetes. So
yeah, that's interesting. I think I have been passed on or proceeded into final stages or offers and technical interviews where I felt I was doing okay, but definitely trying to connect with the individual, actually asking questions, actually being interested, right? It got me a check instead of a maybe. I moved to a yes because of that. And it doesn't take a ton, right? You don't have to be the most charismatic person in the world to cheese your way through interviews. You just have to stand out a little bit, right? I think you want to make enough of an impression and a good impression that when someone thinks back 2 days later, when they're trying to remember the feedback because they're in a feedback session, oh yeah, that person actually, I actually had a good conversation with them, right? Or maybe we connected about coffee or beer or whatever. It doesn't have to be some crazy thing, right? It just needs to be something that you're not just one of many okay engineers they talk to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you know the person you're talking with, research them before you walk in.
Yeah.
Look at their LinkedIn profile, connect with them on LinkedIn, see if they have Twitter, see what they tweet about, get to know the person, call them by name, right? Taylor, you hear your name, it's different. Right, use it a couple times in the interview. If you don't understand how to say their name, ask them how to pronounce it and have them teach you how to pronounce it. They'll really appreciate that. There's a book by Dale Carnegie called How to Win Friends and Influence People. It talks about that. Not to argue. You don't necessarily debate in an interview unless you're called on to debate.
Sure.
And even then, it's a little dicey, right? You're talking about the negative. And don't worry about it. Just be your authentic self. Don't try to put on a fake story. It's going to come out, otherwise. I have somebody that actually has stolen my resume, talking about fake story. I've been contacted by 2 different companies. I've the LinkedIn profile is exactly the same. It doesn't have the fact that the book author is pre that, but yeah. It's kind of funny that they found that this guy is interviewing with my resume. Don't do that. You'll get found out. They were going to troll him. They were literally going to get on the call and troll him. They decided not to waste the time, but yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Because they contacted me that he was using my resume. So,
yeah.
I guess it's a little bit of a an honor to have somebody use your resume. but oh my goodness, you think you're gonna get away with that?
Yeah.
You know?
That's pretty wild. There was a pretty incredible Hacker News article a couple of months ago about something similar where but the company reached out to them and then invited them to be on the Zoom call. Mm-hmm. So the actual person was on the Zoom call while
I asked to do that, actually, on the last one. Yeah, I asked to do that. Yeah. But it didn't. They didn't.
Yeah. I said, dicey. I don't know. It's pretty wild to be like, actually, you're not me, right? But I guess, you want to shut it down, right? If someone's out there pretending.
Well, they don't want to waste their time. It's just it's like, why? You're not even going to hire this guy. You're going to report this guy to LinkedIn or give your recruiter some crap because, the profile that they pulled, it's a duplicate of somebody else. Go look at their GitHub history and see if they actually worked on XYZ projects. Stuff's out and about. You're not going to be able to pull off much nowadays.
Sure. Yeah. Well, maybe back in the day, but yeah, it feels like everything's so public now. Right?
Thank you for watching the first half of the Professional Technical Interviewee. The technical interview will be released 1 week from this episode, so be sure to subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. New episodes are released on the first 4 Thursdays of each month. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Taylor Dorsett or on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. And remember, keep practicing.